Hello, FPL managers. Welcome to a new episode of the FPL Optimized podcast. This is episode number 103. I am Bas, the casual manager, and my co host is Sertop, the data scientist. And this is the podcast in which we combine analytics with the good old eye test. Data or grass, or data and grass? That's the question. Sertop, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Not in terms of fantasy Premier League, but life is fine. Life is good.
Life is fine. That's good. The real life is more important than the fantasy life.
True to a
But
degree. Just
yeah. Let's start with some exciting news as FPL Optimized has been revealed as finalist of the Football Content Awards 2024. So yeah, that's something we're really happy with. And I think it's really exciting, right, Sertop?
yeah, very exciting. I wasn't really expecting. Well, almost everyone says the
No.
same thing, but we were really not expecting it because like FPL Optimize is pretty much an analytics oriented website, and
Yeah.
despite the increasing interest in analytics, still a small community.
Yeah.
So same goes for our podcast too, right? So like even
Yeah.
though we have some audience that we are grateful for, like compared to other big content creators and websites, the number of people who are listening us is very small. Despite that, being nominated for the award is pretty awesome news. I mean, it's also a
Yeah.
recognition of the rise of analytics in a way, so it made me happy.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, the audience maybe compared to some others is small, but I think it's still significant. I mean, we're certainly really happy
Yeah,
with the
definitely.
numbers we're getting, and we also see an increase every year. So that's really cool. So thanks everyone for listening. And also, of course, we would like to thank the judges. Not sure if they're listening, but based on their decision, we are included in the shortlist for Best Fantasy Sports Organization. And yeah, if we read it correctly, the winners will be for 50% decided by votes and for the other 50% by the judges. So this means we can use your help, dear listeners. You can vote for us. So you can go to footballcontentawards.com and then you can click on vote now. And then you can find us in the best of fantasy football category as an organization, which is a little bit funny that we're an organization, but we'll take it. And yeah, thanks in advance for your votes, of course. All right, enough on that. I think Sertop, anything still from you on that?
No, waiting
Cool.
for your
Then
votes.
let's switch to. Sorry.
Waiting for people's votes.
Yes, definitely. Well, let's switch to our regular content and let's start with a short Game Week 5 review.
Uh, I just hate that I start this section like every week and then I lose every week, and then I need to justify that I was unlucky, that you were
Mm,
lucky. So this time I will say you played pretty well. I will do it the
thank
other
you.
way around. Uh, so you won 4 games against me. I finished this game with 54 points. Buzz finished with 78 points. Um, and it is his fourth win against me. We tied in the first game week, and then other remaining 4 game weeks he won.
Yep.
This actually made my future comeback even better because like I'm giving him some advantage, and then
Yes.
once I start winning, so I can say that I gave you some advantage. But you played pretty well. I mean, you captain Holland against Arsenal. Pretty good fixture. So congratulations on your win. Do you want to talk about it?
Thank you. And yeah, I'm pretty sure you will come back at some point. I have no doubt. So I take the lead as much as I can. But no, you're right. I mean, 78 points. Pretty happy with that. A game week rank of approximately 600k. So another good week for me. And to be honest, really the best start I ever had in FPL. So I hope it will continue. Yeah, the points came from Haaland, which was, of course, a little bit of a risk against Arsenal. But yeah, I was counting on his form. And as I mentioned last time, I don't own Salah. So beyond Haaland, there were not really any obvious captaincy options, I would say. But actually, now looking back at it, the team did well across the board with Trent, who scored 11 points, and then Konza with the goal. That was also 9 points. And a really strong midfield performance with Mitoma 5 points. And then I had Smith Rowe and Mbuemo, 8 points each. And then the 10 points from Rogers, which of course were also really nice. So, yeah, nice week. Just two concerns, a little bit the same to last week. I have Pope in goal, which just isn't the best option at the moment. I think that's clear. So at some point, I'll have to change that. And then Isaac as number 9, even though he started, he didn't deliver the goals. And as we said, Newcastle, they don't look like the same team compared to last year. So that will definitely be one change for me this week. Anything else you want to say about your team or your performance?
Little bit. By the way, Mubemo, even though he's in your team, he was on the bench, so you got lucky there with the auto sub. Just want to
I did get
mention.
lucky. Yeah. I had Jota in the team, and like probably many other people, during the last 10 minutes, 5 minutes, I was really hoping that he would stay on the bench, Jota. And he did. And then, Mbuemo came on. So that was actually, I didn't make a transfer last week. And actually, this was one reason, because I was thinking, like, even if Isaac doesn't play, then I'll get Mbuemo against Spurs. And ideally, I wanted to play Mbuemo against Spurs, but I just didn't know who to put on the bench. So quite happy that I didn't make a transfer, saved the transfer. And thanks to that, Mbuemo came out off the bench.
Yeah. I will also talk about my team and game week a little bit more, just a tiny bit. And if you're not familiar and watching on YouTube, so this is a live game week page on fploptimize.com. Well, since we are also nominated, I should also promote it a little bit, right?
Yes.
So this chart actually shows you if, what's the projected points against the field, like how many points difference you are projected to get. And then the sample we use here is called Prime. So these are the 1,000 most successful fantasy football managers, FPL managers. It's compiled by FPL Research, that I'm very grateful for. And so if you are projected to do better than them, that's a pretty good sign that you're playing analytically, more or less. And so we have two lines on this page. One of them is a dashed yellow line, and the other one is a solid blue line. The dashed line shows the projections. So based on projected points that we get from FPL Review, how many points ahead you will be in average. So obviously ownership is a part of this equation. So if everyone has Haaland and you have Haaland, and his contribution to your team is a little bit smaller, obviously. But when your differential score, obviously you get a huge boost, right? So, and then the blue solid line shows actually what happened. So this is a pretty good way of visualizing, if you were a little bit unlucky, really unlucky, like which games you were supposed to get ahead of the field. And when I'm looking at my charts, I actually checked, why did I do pretty bad? I mean, I finished with minus 13 points, meaning that an average manager in the sample got 13 more points than I did. And so, like, the first question is, who's responsible for this? And if you have seen my team, I don't have Haaland, so the answer is pretty obvious. But, how much he contributed to this? Like, what are the other players that damaged my game week? So Haaland, well, he was projected to get 6 points, 6 EV, but he got 9. So he did better than we projected. And it means minus 10 for my team. But the second player is Luis Diaz, who got 16 points. And he was projected to get only 4.5. So there's a huge difference. And then that's a minus 6.7 for my team. So even just these two players, you can explain, why it was a pretty bad game week for me. But on top, Smith Rowe, his ownership is 55%. So this ownership is actually from top 1 million. He's he's owned very significantly. I didn't realize it. And his contribution was minus 4. Rogers 37%, Palmer 36%. I'm just surprised to see these percentages. I wasn't paying attention to ownership, but then yeah, them returning points actually hurt my team pretty bad. But yeah, it happens. But
Yeah,
good to
it's true, but it's
explain.
good that you explained this again. And also, indeed, we don't mention that enough, but a lot of people listening to us and appreciate the data. There is the website, fploptimize.com. So definitely check it out. There's a lot of interesting data and a lot of interesting graphs on there. Okay. So,
Yep.
yeah, that wraps up game week 5, I think.
Yes.
So we'll change topic and we'll start looking forward. And yeah, before we do that, let's talk a little bit again about our podcast format and some of the feedback we received. As mentioned at the start of the season, we wanted to make the podcast a bit shorter this season, mostly for us, to be honest, to make it a little bit easier to produce. But also, we were thinking for you as listeners to make it a bit easier to consume. However, I think some people mentioned to us that they actually missed some of the data that we were using last year. So we are looking at bringing some of it back, and yeah, we're also looking to get some more input on that, right, Sertop?
Yeah, that's correct. We talked within the week about what we can bring back from last season. So
Yeah,
obviously we were doing fixture ticker and we were talking about EV changes. Um, well, obviously they take quite some time for us to prepare and also present, and we wanted to actually deliver what you need to hear, without too much detail.
hmm,
But if there is enough interest, we are actually investigating ways to bring some of these back, or maybe like a better version of those, like what we were
yeah,
trying to express about which teams you can target, which players you can target. But
yeah,
we need some planning with sit down with you and obviously
yeah,
decide
yeah.
on it. But yeah, we are listening your feedback, and hopefully we will have some surprises for you.
Yeah, definitely. So keep the feedback coming, and it's also quite interesting, the mixed feedback because some other people actually do appreciate the shorter format. So yeah, it's never easy to please everyone, but we're actually happy to bring some of it back. So we'll take a look at that. But actually, for today, we'll mainly cover some of the optimal wildcard teams, which is actually I think also very useful this week, as many people have hit the wildcard button for game week 6. So Sertop, yeah, can you take us through some of those optimal teams, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are using ensemble model in these optimal teams again, and someone asked last episode which data we are using. It's the ensemble model. So if you are new, it is the uh, average projection we received from several sources, and these sources are FBL Review, Mikkel Tokmam's transfer algorithm, Fantasy Football Hub's projection model, Fantasy Football Scouts, and Fantasy Football Fix. We gather data from these 5 different resources, and then we take the average. And this is an equal weighted average. In past, we were also doing some weighted average, but we decided to do it so that it also simplifies what we are trying to achieve here. I will go over 4 different teams today. So obviously, when you are wildcarding and if you are using a projection model, if you are using a solver, there are different ways to use this information. Usually it depends on your preferences, like how much, like which players you want to really own. For example, solver can figure out the rest. Or in some cases, you maybe want to schedule transfers, maybe at premium switch at one point. Also, it's possible to not schedule any future transfers so that you can try to be as flexible as possible, so that we can give you maybe a robust team, so that you hope that you will only use your transfers when you need them. So without further ado, so the first thing we have is with no future transfers. So there's no scheduled transfers here. We use default values everywhere else for the bench weights and everything. This team has, I also should mention that while we are running these teams, we need to use a reference point, right? Because everyone's team value is a little bit different. So you
Hmm.
might actually have more money or maybe less money. So maybe you can upgrade this team, or maybe it's not affordable. But so I use my own team. I think it's pretty average. So I had some risers, but I also lost some value from some
Yeah.
players. So yeah, it's always better to check the solver for your own team. So in this team, we have Flecken in the goal. He's 10% owned, pretty good fixtures in general. And then in defense, we have Gabriel, Saliba, Pinnock. So we talked about how Arsenal's fixtures are nice in this horizon, starting game week 6, essentially where we are right now. In midfield, we have Saka, Mubemo, Palmer, Eze. And in forward, we have Calvert-Lewin, Haaland, Wood. On the bench, we have Dennis as our bench goalkeeper, Greaves, Winks, and Bednarek. And so in this team, if you're not scheduling any transfer for the next 8 game weeks, all the midfielders that I mentioned in the lineup and the forwards, they play the entire horizon. So there's no game that you bench them. You also play Flecken, Gabriel, Saliba in every game. So the only player who rotates is Pinnock. For 2 game weeks, you replace him with Greaves. And they have a pretty nice rotation here because Pinnock plays against West Ham and then Wolves. But his third game is against Manchester United. And for that game, you use Greaves, who's playing against Everton. And then you go back to Pinnock, who's playing against Ipswich. And then Greaves again against Leicester. And then Pinnock remains until the end of Horizon, and he plays against Bournemouth, Everton, and Leicester. So I feel like Solver found a pretty nice rotation there with these 2 players, but the rest of the players they have good fixtures in general, despite there are some certain tough fixtures. Yeah, that's the team. Bas, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, no, it looks pretty strong, and it's interesting that the team or the solver relies heavily then on Arsenal and Brentford defensively, right? Basically, those 2 teams. So yeah, the fixtures look good, also for Brentford. But yeah, we know there's always kind of is a risk as well, right? Because it's always easy to concede a goal. So if you concentrate your players too much in certain teams, then yeah, it can also be a risk.
Yeah.
But Arsenal, yeah, we see everyone talking about it, right? The fixtures are looking really good for them. So I think everyone should try to be on 3 Arsenal players.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's the question on whether you go for 2 defenders and then maybe just Saka, or maybe 1 defender and then mix it up with Saka and probably also Havertz.
Yeah.
So I think that's a decision everyone needs to make. Yeah.
Yeah, for double defense, I just want to reiterate. I think we mentioned this at one point, but I feel like there's lots of prejudice against double defenders or triple defenders even. But it is actually a pretty valid strategy because you only need 1 clean sheet from that team. Because otherwise, the alternative is like if you have 2 different players from 2 different teams to be able to get 2 clean sheets. Well, you need to hope that they both keep clean sheet, which reduces the probability even further. So because of this, some games actually penalize you for having double defenders or like triple defenders from the same team. They actually reduce the clean. Well, if they get a clean sheet, you actually get a small penalty. Yeah. So I feel like it is often overlooked in FPL because typically we remember the times we had double or triple defenders and they conceded at the last minute and it was very painful. But I feel like if you think that the team has pretty good fixtures, I mean for Arsenal they have pretty nice fixtures with nice clean sheet probability. I think it is. I mean, you shouldn't discount it. Yes.
No, definitely. And Arsenal, I think, is obvious, right? They've proven that already this season. Plus, on top, especially with Gabriel, we've seen the power he has also with the corners, the attacking threat. It's quite amazing the routine that they created there at Arsenal. If anyone who saw the City game, right, basically they did twice the same corner routine and twice it worked. And the first time he was already really close to scoring a goal, and then the second time he scored it, and it's so difficult to defend. And he can jump really well. So yeah, I think Gabriel is a no-brainer. And then indeed, as I said, yeah, you could go for the double defense. I think Raya is also really popular, so that could be the other option, that you go for Raya instead of Saliba. Do watch out a little bit, because there is some injury concern over Raya. I think just before the podcast, I saw some news that he does seem to have an issue. So that's something, yeah, we need to monitor for the weekend. But no, double Arsenal defense, sure. I think a lot of people will be doing it.
Okay, so the next team I want to talk about today is Optimal Wildcard 6 team with future transfers. So here we allow future transfers, but the catch is we still value free transfers a bit so that the rolling has some positive impact on your team. So we are not completely saying that, oh, like schedule all the free transfers. It's more like, well, if they're worth losing my free transfers, then schedule those transfers and I will try to follow it through. So we are mostly curious about how it will change the initial team. So in this team, we have Flecken in the goal, Gabriel, Saliba, Pinnock, same defense. And we have Saka, Rogers, Mbeumo, Palmer, Eze, and Haaland and Wood in forward. So as you see, it dropped Calvert-Lewin, and it has now Rogers here. And so it starts with this team, but it rolls until game week 9. So that for the next 3 game weeks, you are rolling your free transfers. And on game week 10, it sells Saliba for Robertson, Rogers for Salah, and Haaland for Solanke. So it's essentially a premium switch here, right? So you are trying to go from Haaland to Salah. And the funny thing is, if you just check the values on that game week, actually Haaland has better EV than Salah. So actually, and then you're captaining Salah. So you're going from the optimal captain to a suboptimal one. They are pretty close in terms of projections, but Haaland is ahead.
Okay.
So at first glance, it's just funny, but you're also getting Robertson by selling Saliba here. So the extra money you get from Haaland, you are able to actually afford a nice team, and so you are actually strengthening by dropping Haaland for Solanke. Okay. And the only other transfer scheduled is in game week 11. You sell Davis, who was at the bench of the initial team, for Dalot, and he remains until the end of the horizon for game week 11, 12, and 13. So when you get Salah, you actually captain him 3 times. In game week 10 against Brighton, game week 11 against Aston Villa, and game week 12 against Southampton. So game week 13 is kind of an issue because City is playing against Liverpool. So both Salah and Haaland has low EV that game week. That's why usually it captains Palmer, who's playing against Aston Villa. At this, with the projections we have right now, Palmer seems to be the ideal captain choice. I will also talk about another team where you start with Palmer, you drop Palmer because his fixtures in the middle is, relatively worse, but then you get Palmer back for actually game week 13. But any comments on this team before I move forward?
No, not really any comments, but would you agree that this team is probably more valid for people to look at in terms of, in reality, we are making transfers? So compared to the previous team where there are no transfers made, probably this one that you're showing now is more realistic. Would you agree?
So between the previous team and this one, there's 8 expected value difference, but you're using 4 transfers. So, free transfers, their value is debated highly, but if it is a region where we expect lots of injuries, like international breaks, they're more valuable because you don't know what's gonna happen. But if it is a relatively safe region, like game weeks are not too close, maybe like mid-week game weeks and everything, then it might be okay to keep the free transfer value low. So you get 8 more EV, but scheduling 4 transfers. I think the better way to approach this is this. Like if I'm looking at this, immediate thing I see is that it tries to go from Haaland to Salah on game week 10. So maybe you can schedule that one because that's a pretty major move. And then, but maybe you don't need to really schedule, going from Saliba to Robertson or like Davis to Della. You can decide those, when the time comes. You can kind of assume that, well, I'm gonna do a transfer, but I don't know. So maybe it's hard to tell. But if I have seen this, I will start with this team probably. But I will try to schedule less transfers by increasing the free transfer value a little bit, because there is a point of free transfer value where Solver won't suggest you going from Haaland to Salah. So you are essentially looking if that value is pretty sensitive or not. Because if I increase the free transfer value even a tiny bit, if it is not scheduling this transfer, then it is something to think about. But since premium switch is so important, I think if you increase your free transfer value, it will drop some of these other transfers, but probably it will keep the premium switch. So you need to play around. Obviously, scheduling too many transfers is a bad idea. Not scheduling is also kind of a bad idea, but it can turn out just fine if there are lots of injuries or lots of rotations, which it happened in the recent game weeks, right? Like lots of popular players, they got benched or they got injured. So maybe it's, somewhere in between is better.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. Then let's look at the other team you prepared.
And the other team is the same setting, but what if we force Salah in from the first game week together with Haaland? Like if you want to have both premium players, because obviously they returned lots of points in previous game weeks. So the team is actually, it's funny because it has Raya in the goal now. It's Raya, Gabriel, Saliba, so triple Arsenal defenders. It has Robertson, Rodgers, Semenyo, Mbeumo, Eze, Salah in midfield, and we have Haaland and Wood in forward. Pinnock and Greaves are there on the bench. So if you start with this team, in game week 7 it rolls, but in game week 8 it sells Semenyo for Bruno Fernandes and Salah for Son. So it's pretty interesting because we have just seen that the Solver was trying to bring Salah in game week 10. But here, if you start with him, Solver says, well, I'm going to sell him in game week 8 and we'll never buy him back, which is pretty interesting. But I think you also start with a good team, and then when you switch to Fernandes and Son, you already spread the funds around, so it's maybe hard for Solver to go back. Haaland stays the entire horizon. Saliba is sold for Gvardiol in game week 9, and Gvardiol is sold for Dalot in game week 11. So there's like 2 defender switches there, and then Son becomes Palmer in game week 12. So there is like more disruptions here compared to the previous plan where Salah comes in game week 10. This plan actually gives you 3 more less expected value. It's not a huge difference, but you're scheduling also 5 transfers for this plan. So more transfers, but a little bit lower EV. I think it's better to start with Haaland and then switch to Salah if that plan remains optimal. I mean.
Yeah, and the other thing you can see in this one here is the Haaland captaincy, right? 6 out of 8 weeks. So, and also if you look at the opponents, some interesting games still. Fulham at home, Wolves away, Southampton at home. So, it makes sense, I would say, to captain Haaland.
Yep, definitely. So the only game weeks are Son against Ipswich in game week 11, where Haaland plays against Brighton. And game week 13, where Palmer is the captain against Aston Villa, when Haaland plays against Liverpool. So
Liverpool, okay, makes sense.
And the last team is, what if we enable future transfers again, but this time we say, well, feel free to use all the free transfers. I don't really care about rolling free transfers. I don't want to be prepared. So what's the extreme scenario where you can schedule every transfer you have? It starts with this team: Flecken, Gabriel, Saliba, Pinnock, Saka, Rodgers, Mbeumo, Palmer, Eze, Haaland, and Wood. If you start with this in game week 8, it sells Saliba for Gvardiol, and it does the same thing. Gvardiol remains 2 game weeks, and then it sells for Robertson. And then Palmer becomes Son for 4 game weeks, and then you sell Son back again for Palmer. So it actually starts with Palmer, sells him, and then buys him back. And Rodgers becomes Salah, Haaland becomes Solanke. It's the same switch in game week 10, and Gvardiol becomes Robertson. So Solver really likes that move. Davis becomes Dalot. We also have seen it in the limited scheduled transfer plan. And then, as I mentioned, Son becomes Palmer. So on top of the premium switch, so the only interesting thing here is that it sells Saliba for 2 game weeks between game week 8 and 9, where City is playing against Wolves and Southampton. And also there is this Palmer to Son, Son to Palmer switch.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. And then this plan gives you 494 lineup expected value, which is, if we compare to the second plan where we were scheduling transfers, it was 490. So you get 4 more EV, but then you're scheduling 3 more transfers. So in my opinion, this is too much. Like in terms of the free transfer value, this is probably not worth it.
Right.
If you go with such a plan, you really hope that everyone stays fit and you will be able to follow through every transfer, which is unlikely.
Yeah. Okay. Wow, that's great. I think it's super useful again for everyone who's on Wildcard to consider these different options. And as we always say, I mean, even if you're not on Wildcard, then discovered a lot of players that you should be interested in anyway, because they appear in the optimal team. All right, but also out of transparency, I think we should also say that I'm certainly not wildcarding this week. I think you are also not, or are you?
No, I'm not. I have already. Well, I wasn't thinking about it anyway, but I also missed the price changes, so it's it's already a sunken cost for me. I don't want to activate my wildcards because I wasn't really paying attention. But all of my transfers so far with an idea that I will keep these players for a longer time. So I'm just hoping to use my wildcard when I feel like, is the chance, but not in game week 6 for sure.
Okay. So you're still going without Haaland a little bit longer?
Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, well, for me also, I mean, the team still looks quite good. I'm happy with it, and I actually have 3 free transfers, which I can use now to set me up for the next couple of game weeks. The only thing which is kind of happening is that I think the people that are wildcarding are getting the players that I already had in my team. So yeah, it's maybe nice that I mean, it feels like I had a kind of an edge, but it's also now I'm also losing that because I think a lot of the players I have are really becoming template. But okay, at least I can save my wild card and I can use it a bit later. And for me this week, definitely the objective is to get Saka into the team. We talked about it before, right? The Arsenal good fixtures coming up, 2 home fixtures. So I think everyone will try to have 3 Arsenal players. I didn't make that transfer yet, though, as there were some rumors about Saka potentially having an injury, but I saw that he's playing tonight in the cup game. So Saka looks all right, I hope. So let's see if he stays fit tonight. I'll definitely bring him in tonight because I also saw that he might ride in price tonight. So this could be the night to do it. And I did make my other 2 transfers because some players were dropping. I sold Jota, who was dropping in price, for Semenyo, because I think also Semenyo has good fixtures. And then Isaac I sold for Raul of Fulham, Jimenez. So yeah, that's just basically a budget pick as third attacker. But he looks to be in good form, so I don't mind to have him. And Semenyo, we talked about him before, right? He's an attractive player. He's a midfielder in FPL, but he's an attacker in reality. And Bournemouth has a few good games coming up, so I'm quite happy to have him. And then for my third player to sell, that will be Mitoma, as the Brighton fixtures will get a bit tougher. So Mitoma to Saka. And then, yeah, well, I'll go into game week 6.
So you had 3 free transfers, right? So you're using all of them?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll use all of them. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that was the plan last week. So I tried to save it last week to have 3 free transfers because I had to move some funds around to be able to fit Saka in because Saka is at 10 million. So it was not so easy for me to fit him in.
Hmm.
But with these changes, especially of course with downgrading Isaac, I could make it work.
Yeah.
All right. Final chart to look at as usual. The captaincy options.
In captaincy, we have three choices actually this game week, unlike other game weeks where there's a clear winner. But in this game week, projections model, they favor Saka. His average is 7.19, and Haaland comes second with 7.11. So as you see, there is 0.08 EV difference, which can be even like a noise between these models. So it's very close. And the Salah comes third with 7.08. So he is 0.003 away from Haaland.
Wow.
So all of these three players are pretty good captaincy choices.
Yeah.
And then comes Palmer at 6.43, Mubemo at 6.10, and Havertz at 5.83. If we look at the captaincy polls on Fantasy Football Scout, which is more towards the general FPL audience, Haaland is at 52%, Saka 16%, and Salah is at 10%. So clearly Haaland is the favorite for the in general.
Yeah.
In our analytics Discord, our captaincy poll is just the other way around. So Salah got so far 12 points, Saka got 59. Salah got 12 votes, Saka got 59 votes, and Haaland got 11. So Saka is much more favored compared to the general audience, and the reason is he's ahead in projection models. But again, the EV is very close. It's almost like the same. Yeah. So it's not clear. How are you gonna captain?
Yeah. I mean, normally if you would look at the fixtures, right? Arsenal, they play at home against Leicester.
Mm-hmm.
And Man City play away against Newcastle. So normally I think you would say, yeah, we should bet on the Arsenal game. But in this case, with Haaland being in great form and also Newcastle struggling a bit this season, I will just put it on Haaland again. Sorry, it's a bit boring, but it has been working for me so far, so I'll just keep it. Yeah. And you?
Since I don't have Haaland, my choices are obviously Salah and Saka. I feel like Saka is the better choice between the two.
Yeah.
But
I think so too. Yeah. All right. I think that was it for today, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So then, as usual, we'll take a look at the mini league, and we now have 448 teams in the league. It keeps going up, which is great. Thanks everyone for joining. And you can still join via the code 9GXNDK. We have a new leader who is Lyle Mosley with his team Don't Panic. He had a game week score of 76 points, and that gave him the lead with a total of 414 points. Well done, Lyle. And the gap with number 2 is just 3 points, though, so it's really close. And in the number 2 position, it's Clement Ubajaka, who had the same number 2 spot last week and I think also the week before. So a very stable performance for him so far. He scored 71 points and he's on 411 points in total. And then at number 3, we have our former leader, LG Fraser, who dropped 2 places now after a game week score of 62 points. Yeah, and as we keep saying, the season only just started, so it's still a long way to go. So I would say keep it up to the leaders, and of course, don't give up to everyone else. All right, that's it. And thank you again for listening. You can subscribe to our podcast so you'll get notified when the next episode is out. You can also follow us on X. For Sertalp, it's at Sertal Bilal, and for me, it's at BelfiBB. And we have the separate account for the pod, which is at FPL Optimized. And if you're listening to the podcast, please be aware you can also see us on YouTube. So just look for FPL Optimized on YouTube. And when you're there, feel free to leave a like or hit the subscribe button. And just a last reminder, if you want to vote for us to win an award in the Football Content Awards, go to footballcontentawards.com and you can find us in the best of fantasy football category. Thank you for that.
And until next time, stay curious and stay analytical. Goodbye.